Okay, so today we're taking a deep dive into the world of NFTs.
Definitely.
And we're going to do that through the lens of a case study that you sent us about Nicholas Elmahead.
Yeah, it's a really interesting one.
Yeah.
So Nicholas, just for those who might not be familiar, is the artist behind those really iconic black and gold portraits of the Nobel laureates.
Yeah.
The ones you always see every October.
Exactly. He's been creating them since 2012.
That's right.
And they've really become kind of synonymous with the prize itself.
Absolutely.
But here's where things get really interesting.
Okay.
Nicholas is at this crossroads deciding whether to stick with these really prestigious physical portraits or take a leap into the world of NFTs.
Right. And I think what's so interesting about this particular case study, right?
Yeah.
Is that he's not just some random artist who's like, oh, NFTs, I'm going to jump into this new trend.
Right.
He has a really interesting background
Okay.
that makes it even more compelling.
What makes his story so unique?
He has a master's degree in electrical engineering.
Oh, wow.
From KTH Royal Institute of Technology, which is a very prestigious university in Sweden.
Wow. I was picturing like a very traditional art school background.
You would think, right.
Yeah.
But he also has a master's degree in liberal arts
Oh, wow.
from the Royal Institute of Art in Stockholm.
So he's got both sides of the coin here.
Totally. And so I think what this really highlights is that, this is somebody who understands technology, he understands the digital world.
Yeah.
And so he's not just reacting to a trend, he's really thinking about, okay, how can I apply these new technologies to what I'm doing?
Right. It's a very different approach than somebody who just kind of jumps on the bandwagon,
Exactly.
Right.
He's very strategic. And you can see that even in the way that he's approaching this dilemma, he's not just saying, yes, I'm going to do NFTs or no, I'm not. He's really weighing all these different factors.
Right. And to add even more pressure to this whole situation,
Yeah.
he's facing this dilemma while he's on a tight deadline for the 2023 laureate portraits.
You can imagine, right, like trying to make this really big decision that could potentially change your entire career trajectory while also having to meet this very important deadline.
And for such a prestigious event as well.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So talk about a pressure cooker.
Yeah, it's a great example of how these technological advancements, they don't just exist in a vacuum, right?
Right.
They affect real people and they have these real world consequences. And that's what makes this case study so fascinating.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because we can all probably relate to that in some way.
Absolutely. So we've got this incredibly talented artist, master of both like the paintbrush and the pixel.
Right.
And he's kind of at this fork in the road.
Yeah.
Stick with this traditional art world that he's found success in, or kind of dive headfirst into the NFT game.
Exactly.
And I think what's so interesting about this case study is that it really does a good job of kind of highlighting both the good and the bad.
Yeah.
It doesn't shy away from the possible downsides.
Absolutely.
So like one of the upsides for Nicholas is that NFTs would give him a level of control over his artwork.
Yes.
That you don't really see in the traditional art world.
Totally.
So can you elaborate on that for a little bit? Like how would that actually work?
Well, a big part of that is this idea of smart contracts.
Yep.
So basically you can write code into the NFT itself that dictates what happens when it's sold.
Oh, wow.
Or even when it's resold.
So it's like embedding this digital contract into the artwork.
Exactly.
Okay.
And so that can benefit artists like Nicholas because let's say he sells an NFT of one of his portraits.
Right.
Every time that NFT is resold,
Yeah.
he could get a percentage of that sale.
Oh, wow.
And that's something that's pretty much unheard of in the traditional art world.
That's huge.
Once you sell a painting, that's it.
Right. Yeah. It's gone.
Unless it goes to auction, it's way later.
Yeah.
But even then, you don't see any of that money.
Right. Exactly.
So this is a way for artists to potentially have a more sustainable income
Yeah.
and benefit from the appreciation of their work over time.
And to control where it goes and how much it goes for.
To an extent,
Yeah. Okay.
it depends on how the smart contract is written.
So it sounds like a really great opportunity, but the case study also mentions OpenSea,
Yeah.
which I've heard about.
It's one of the biggest NFT marketplaces.
Okay.
But it doesn't sound like it's all perfect over there.
Right. What's the deal with that?
Yeah. There have been some issues with scams and just some questionable practices.
Oh, really?
Yeah. And there's not a whole lot of regulation in the NFT space yet.
Okay.
So it can be a little bit risky.
Yeah, like the Wild West?
Kind of, yeah.
And then on top of all that, there's the whole environmental impact,
Oh, yeah. That's another big one.
which I've heard is not great.
Yeah. It can be a problem depending on the technology that's used.
Okay, so like what are we talking about here? What's the main concern?
Well, some NFT technologies, particularly something called proof of work,
Okay.
can be really energy intensive.
What is proof of work?
It's a bit technical, but basically it involves a lot of computers solving complex math problems
Okay.
to verify transactions and secure the network.
Okay.
And that takes a lot of energy.
So is that what most NFTs use? Is this proof of work?
It's one approach, and it's what's used for some popular blockchains.
Okay.
But there are other ways to do it.
Like what?
Well, the case study also mentions Polygon,
Okay.
which uses something called proof of stake.
Okay.
And that's a more environmentally friendly option.
So how does proof of stake work?
It's a bit different. Instead of having all these computers racing to solve problems,
Yeah.
proof of stake chooses validators
Yeah.
based on how much cryptocurrency they have staked or locked up in the system. So it's like a system of voting rights based on your stake in the network.
Interesting.
And this method uses way less energy.
Okay, so it sounds like Nicholas is really weighing these two different paths.
Right.
You know, the higher profile, maybe more sales through Nifty Gateway.
Yeah, which uses proof of work
Right. That has
versus
those environmental concerns.
right versus this more environmentally friendly option with Polygon,
Exactly.
which maybe doesn't have the same kind of visibility.
Potentially. Yeah.
So what a dilemma.
It is. And what's really cool is that Nicholas is actually trying to negotiate with Nifty Gateway.
Oh, really?
Yeah, to see if they would consider using more sustainable technology.
So he's not just sitting back and letting things happen. He's trying to actually
He's trying to make a difference.
make a difference and kind of, and use his platform to advocate for change.
Yeah, and advocate for it. Yeah.
It's, I think, is really admirable.
It is. Yeah, it's really cool. It's really cool to see an artist trying to kind of push the envelope in terms of making technology better.
Absolutely.
But the case study goes even deeper.
It does.
It brings up this whole issue of data privacy.
Right.
Which I feel like sometimes gets lost in these conversations about NFTs.
Totally.
So what are the concerns there?
Well, I think the big thing to remember is that with NFTs, ownership ultimately comes down to data,
Oh, okay.
right? It's all digital records of who owns what.
Right.
And depending on how these systems are designed, there's a potential for that information to be exposed.
So like what kind of information are we talking about and who's at risk?
So let's say, for example, you buy one of Nicholas's NFT portraits. Right?
Yeah. Okay.
There's a record of that transaction.
Right.
And depending on the platform and the NFT itself, that record might include your identifying information.
Okay.
So your name, your wallet address, even details about your digital wallet.
And that's a problem for people who, value their privacy.
Exactly. And especially if you're talking about high value transactions.
Right.
You might not want everyone to know what you're buying and selling.
So it's like the difference between buying a painting at a gallery anonymously
Yeah,
versus having your name on a digital billboard every time you make a purchase.
exactly. And then the case study also talks about how different auction mechanisms can come into play, like OpenSea.
Yeah.
They use both English auctions, which is what most people are familiar with.
Right. Just like eBay.
Exactly. But they also use Dutch auctions.
Okay, I'll be honest. I'm not as familiar with Dutch auctions. What is that?
So in a Dutch auction, the price actually starts high
Okay.
and it gradually decreases
Oh, interesting.
until somebody decides to buy.
Oh, so it's kind of like
It creates this sense of urgency.
yeah, like a countdown almost.
Exactly. Yeah.
Okay, so we've got these different ways of buying and selling, but how does this all tie back to the cognitive theories that the case study mentions?
Yeah. So remember figure ground theory.
Refresh my memory.
So it basically suggests that we understand images better when there's a clear distinction between the subject and the background.
Right, like how Nicholas's portraits have those really stark black backgrounds
Exactly.
that make the faces just pop.
And so that visual contrast, that use of figure ground, might actually enhance the way that we perceive the artwork. And then when you bring that principle into the digital world, the way that the artwork is presented,
Yeah.
kind of the digital frame, so to speak, can also influence how it's valued.
Okay, so it's like you're curating the entire viewing experience,
Yeah.
even in the digital realm.
And then you add in the fact that Nicholas is not just competing with other artists.
Right.
He's also potentially competing with AI-generated art.
Right, because now we have algorithms that can create art.
Exactly.
So how does a traditional artist like Nicholas, who puts so much of himself into his work,
Right.
compete with an algorithm that can just spit out endless variations?
Well, and I think the case study does a good job of highlighting that the NFT market is not the gold rush that it was a few years ago.
Right, it's cooled down.
Yeah, it's definitely cooled down. It's more saturated.
So this hardened to stand out.
Exactly.
So what is Nicholas doing to try to, set himself apart?
Well, he's really smart. He's leveraging his existing fan base.
Okay.
He's doing things like beta testing his NFTs.
Oh, really?
Almost like you would beta test a video game.
Oh, that's a really interesting approach.
Getting feedback from his followers before he does like a big launch.
So he's building anticipation.
Exactly.
Getting people excited.
Yeah.
That's really smart.
It's a really interesting strategy.
So it sounds like Nicholas is doing everything he can to kind of set himself up for success.
Yeah.
But I think there's still this big question
Yeah.
that the case study doesn't really answer.
And it's the big one.
It is. How does Nicholas reconcile his existing reputation, those Nobel portraits,
Right.
with this whole NFT thing? Like, does he go for exclusivity, high-end sales,
Right. Does he try to appeal to a wider audience?
but risk his brand?
Exactly.
So it's a tough decision.
Yeah, it's a tough one.
And unfortunately, we don't have the answer.
Not yet, at least.
Not yet. Maybe he'll let us know.
Yeah, we'll have to have him on the show.
There you go.
But I think what's so valuable about this case study is that it really forces us to think about these issues.
It does.
You know, it's not just
But-
about art.
Right.
It's about how we navigate these technological advancements in a way that aligns with our values.
Absolutely.
And that's something we can all learn from.
Absolutely. And that's something that I think everyone listening can think about in their own lives.
Definitely.
Whether you're an artist or not.
Because we're all dealing with this in some way or another.
Exactly. So on that note, thank you so much for bringing this case study to our attention.
Oh, it was my pleasure. This is a really fun one to dive into.
Yeah, this was a good one.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Thanks for being here.